What's up guys, it is Guapeeee back again doing another top 10 list on the channel, and this time we're going to be looking at the best melee frames in the game. The problem with doing this list is that there's so many options for me to pick from, especially with all the exalted changes that happened over the past few updates. Now we've got a bunch of frames that can buff and bolster melees in general. Then we've got the traditional exalted melee weapons such as an exalted blade Excalibur, and then we've also got the previously pseudo exalted frames such as Atlas with his landslide, now fitting that melee theme way more because they have separately moddable exalteds. So there's a lot of melee frames in the game, and narrowing this down to 10 is rather difficult. So not only is coming up with the correct honourable mentions a bit tricky, but also ordering these frames, I'd recommend taking it with a grain of salt. Reality is melee is the best in the game right now because of stuff like influence, so all of these frames are good, and this is just the way I'm ordering. It's personal preference. If you disagree, that's fine, and if you feel like arguing and maybe crashing out in the comments over my orders or my picks, that's also fine because it helps the algorithm. I'm going to start off with the honourable mentions. I think Ash is a really solid melee frame. Rhino is kind of a sleeper pick. Gorse is really good, very close to making the list, but he's also really good at gunplay. Sevagoth has to be a mention because he has a literal exalted melee weapon in his shadow. And then finally, the one that was in my opinion closest to making the list that I couldn't justify fitting in was Volt. I think Volt is easily one of the best melee frames in the game, but because we got so many good options now in so many different subcategories of melee, you'll see on the list why he didn't quite make it. Starting off with the number 10 spot is a frame that I have to put at the number 10 ranking, not necessarily because she's the weakest out of the 10. If anything, she might be the strongest. The problem is she's good at everything in the game, not just melee, and arguably even better at either being a caster frame or even gunplay, and that's Saren. Saren is no doubt one of the best melee frames in the game. She does have a strong lean into the melee category because her third ability Toxic Lash has more damage when used with melee weapons, so she can infuse your attacks with toxin damage. She can spread corrosive and infuse corrosive with her augment, spread viral with her 4, all some of the best debuffs and melee elements in the game. Where she falls short a bit in this category is that in order to be a really solid melee frame, a lot of the time you want to be a bit of a brawler and have solid survivability. Saren falls short here. She does have builds where you can lean into health tanking with regenerative molt, but her best form of survivability is just spamming shield gate with her molt, and whilst that can easily take you to level cap, it's a bit cheese and any frame in the game can do it. She's a no-brainer for this list. She can make any melee weapon in the game work. As for when I build her for melee specifically, I subsume over her 4th ability with Nourish. Because we're not spam casting, this is literally just an alternative way of proccing that viral from miasma. So yeah, you could just keep a regular 4 for this. And then a melee weapon I like using with her is the Rack to Dark Dagger because it can give you more shields when you're swinging it, meaning you don't have to shield gate as much with your abilities. It does a lot of really good status, a very strong melee with the ability to keep you alive, and that's how I set up my Saren for melee. Okay, now we can lean into the more specific choices, such as Excalibur, who is our number 9. If anything, he's in a similar spot to Saren in the sense that he's not known for having great survivability, but he has to be on the list because he has an incredible exalted weapon that got way better with the recent update, and there's so many things about his kit that leans into the melee aspect. He does more damage at base with his passive with swords, he can boost his combo really fast with the augment for his slash dash, he can open enemies up to finishers with his blind, and that also means they take stealth damage multipliers as well. He can use the augment for his radial javelin to boost your melee damage even further. And then Exalted Blade is literally just this game's version of a lightsaber, except it can send out radial waves ahead that also work with melee influence. So this is one of the best ranged melee attacks in the game, and his entire kit leans towards bolstering your melee damage. However, as I said, he is lacking a little bit in survivability. You can go with a shield regen build on him, maybe a little bit of shield gating, and then also use the invulnerability from your slash dash to make it work. And for most still path content, if you're not going endless, you can get by with maybe an Eclipse over some health mods like the Umbral set. He can health tank somewhat decently, and you do have a blind. That's his only problem, is he kind of wants you to be a bit quick and nippy using your first skill frequently to keep those shields up, specifically when going higher levels. But outside of that, he isn't quite the brawler he wants to be, hence why he's at number 9. But the damage you can pump out with him is insane. The setup I'm showing off with him is of course Brain Dead. We're combining the viral of Nourish with gas on our melee. This build is leading into that playstyle that I mentioned where you're trying to go pretty fast and use slash dash often to make sure you're recharging your shields. You could also fit in Brief Respite here if you don't want growing power. And he does so much damage with this exalted blade that you don't need any sort of meta helmet picks such as Nourish or Raffle Advance. This is just me going full overkill. At the number 8 spot, we've got Varuna. Varuna is widely known as one of the best frames when it comes to the melee class, and if anything, a lot of people would have said she should be top 2. I personally disagree with this a bit, because I think Varuna's most underrated aspect is her 4th ability, but it's not really a melee, it doesn't really fit into that, even a pseudo exalted, it doesn't fit into that class, it is just a ability skill with damage in AoE, but when it comes to actually bolstering melee, you can go invisible, then break that invis for a crit buff, spread a large amount of stats with her 2nd skill, thus contributing to a condition overload playstyle and just debuffing enemies in a large radius, especially if you're using the augment to also spread a damage debuff. And when that invis breaks on your 1, you can also go for a health tank playstyle by using those health orbs dropped by your 3rd skill, throwing on maybe adaptation and health conversion, dropping armor. Varuna's first 3 abilities, all 100%, do contribute to her being a great melee frame, it's just her 4 kind of puts a hammer in the works. Ironically, one of the best ways to rock Varuna is to subsume a great melee skill in Raffle Advance from another great melee Warframe, which we'll talk about later, or even going with something like Raw. I think this puts her on the back end of the list as well. Her skills are great on their own for melee, but I feel like in order to come together to really be at the top of the class, she has to rely on Helmet a little bit. And I also don't like how her first skill breaks invis unless you're using the 4th ability. An absolute classic combination that I like using with Varuna is throwing on Raffle Advance over her 4 and then combining it with a ceramic dagger. You can lean it into either large amounts of status or crit. She is flexible to build, you can just lean into the 4th skill if you want and be completely invisible, or you can go for a shield regen build, or even lean into health tanking with health conversion combined with those health orbs of your 3rd skill, and she synergizes really well with the Arkham mod set. To be honest, if her 4th skill was actually a melee weapon, I'd probably put her higher on the list, but she's still a really strong melee Warframe. Next up is one of the melee frames that I believe got way stronger recently, and that is Cora. She was already really strong, but in case you are unaware, casting speed now contributes to the attack speed of your exalted Whip Claw. Cora's Whip Claw, it is just a melee weapon, I know it's pseudo, but to me it counts. It did lose a little bit of its single target damage, I guess, with its stat changes, but considering how strong it is with something like Melee Influence and all the other arcanes that are now available on it, I can't call this thing any weaker, especially because now you can rapid fire the thing with the correct choices of Arc and Shard. Where Cora exceeds the expectations of a melee frame compared to someone like Saren is that she has a room-wide nuke with just the press of 1 button, and that is just her melee weapon. You spam Whip Claw, everything dies in the radius. You can lock off certain areas as well to spread that damage with your Strangle Dome. And she has grouping as well, which is huge for melee Warframes, which means you don't have to run something like a Nautilus for grouping. And because you're just mashing that first skill, she is probably the best Shieldgate Warframe on the list. So yeah, even though she may not lean fully into a broader playstyle, hell, even her Kavat can offer you healing in some fashion. I just think with the amount of room nuking she has to offer with her melee weapon, she has to be at a decent spot on the list. And dare I say I might be putting her a bit low because of that casting speed change, she might even be higher. As I said, when it comes to building her, I'm leaning fully into shield gating, this time with catalyzing shields and brief respite, also a bunch of range. You want to combine your range on your melee build with the range on your Warframe build, and then you're spreading that all with melee influence at the same time. You could be boring yet efficient and use Nourish for energy regen and viral, and then throw either just pure electricity and influence on your melee build, or you could throw on something like gas. Even influence isn't all that necessary, as you could go with something like melee exposure because you're spam casting, and then you can use that corrosive damage in combination with a gas and viral combination from Nourish. Cora is absolutely insane currently. The next Warframe on the list is luckily one that I just did a full comprehensive in-depth guide on, showing a bunch of builds for, and that is Atlas. It is debatable on whether you could put Atlas or Cora in this spot. They're very similar, they both have a spam cast exalted melee weapon, Atlas is being landslide, huge room nuking at the press of a button, but here's why I'm putting Atlas slightly above Cora. As I've already mentioned, I like it when melee Warframes can lean into that survivability aspect outside of just shield gating, and Atlas fits the brawler theme because he has large amounts of iframes, good health potential, and a shit ton of armor. And because he can spam cast, you can shield regen or shield gate with him as well, so he has every option available. Self-healing with rubble, large amounts of armor gain from the same skill, iframes with your first skill, freezing enemies with petrify and debuffing them, enemy aggro pull with your fourth, you don't talk about the second ability, okay? And landslide is devastating no matter what you run it with. In the gameplay I'm using the Raffle Advance setup from the Atlas guide, but in that same Atlas guide, there are a bunch more builds that are way more off meta. So even though I'm using a bunch of meta builds today, I promise you that's not all we do on this channel. If you want some unique stuff for Atlas that's actually fun and different to what you may be normally using, I recommend checking out that Atlas guide that we already uploaded. To be honest, Atlas could probably be even higher on this list because of how well he fits the brawler playstyle and the fact he has one of the best exotic weapons in the game right now. The only thing that's really holding him back a little bit is the fact that his fourth and his second skills are kind of shit. At the number 5 spot, we have my personal favourite frame in the game, Wukong. I would have been vouching for him even way before the recent changes in his ability to use arcanes on his staff. Wukong's in a unique spot because he has a more traditional exalted weapon compared to the likes of Atlas, but the one trait he has, if anything it's multiple traits that combine together, is his speed of which he can traverse with his slide attacks, whilst also combining that with a massive range on his staff that's further bolstered by the likes of something like Influence. He has self-healing with his Cloud Walker, aggro pull with his clone that also does a large amount of damage and can use the same staff. You can still do slam builds with him as well, even though it's less efficient. He can lean into a brawler playstyle with a large amount of armor from his Defy, comparable to that of Atlas. Primal Fury is potentially in its best form right now. A few years ago it was once the best melee in the game, and it's potentially still the best melee right now, albeit with a combination of those arcanes. Am I biased in putting him in this list? Yes, but I don't think there's anyone that's going to disagree with him being here. It says a lot that a frame like Wukong, even after so many nerfs, can still outpace the likes of Excalibur, who's had plenty of buffs recently, and Excalibur can send exalted waves forward and still get out DPS'd by the likes of Wukong, who's just walking forward with a really long stick and occasionally spamming slides, covering more distance quickly and killing faster, and he's got better survivability in general. And if you're not satisfied with his ability to self-heal or his armor count, you can easily rock a shield regen build on him as well and use your second skill as a shield gate. I feel almost relieved to say that the footage I'm using for this one, I'm actually using a build that doesn't include Nourish. Instead, I'm subsuming off his Cloud Walker in this build for Warcry because I think having attack speed on Primal Fury is amazing, and we also get bonus armor that's combining with Defy to make us more tanky, and all of my heals is coming from my choice of arcanes and equilibrium. Just a heavy swing into DPS and tankiness all in one. Wukong still one of the best in the game when it comes to melee. However, there's a frame that I think has slightly outdone Wukong within the particular exalted weapon category, and he's not the only one. I think Baruch is fucking insane. He kind of combines the best of both worlds from Excalibur and Wukong at the same time. Of course his reactive storm is the main culprit of why he's so good, but ever since the exalted changes and being able to use those arcanes, you don't actually need this augment to be all that strong. We recently showed on this channel what this is like when you combine it with the new Thara Strike augment for even more crit damage and armor stripping. It is overkill. He can pretty much adapt to any enemy type in the game. He sends exalted waves forward much like Excalibur's exalted blade, except in the form of his fists, so it has really strong range. But the damage in which it hits for is arguably way higher than that of maybe a Wukong Primal Fury, and where it shines is if you combine it with a lot of attack speed, which he has an augment for that's also going to increase your crit damage. There's just a bunch of ways to increase the DPS of this weapon, and on top of all of that, he's one of the best brawlers in the game. He can take 0 damage if you're not attacking enemies when you're using a Elude, and that's going to help keep the ability active. You can spam LOL to keep your 4th skill on, but I think Elude is actually really good for this. You also take 50% less damage whilst your ult is active, and you can combine that damage reduction with the DR from your 3rd skill, so your overall damage reduction renders you borderline unkillable for most reasonable content in the game, which is just better scaling survivability than that of Wukong and Excal if we're not counting Excalibur's iframes. And you can put enemies to sleep as well, clears hordes instantly, huge damage numbers, adaptive damage, top level damage reduction in the game. This frame is doing so many things at once that works well within this category. He could even be higher on the list when we talk about our next frame, but I think Baruch is absolutely bonkers at the minute. At the number 3 spot, we have the last of the previously pseudo-exalteds, if you want to call them, and that's Gara. I don't really play too much Gara. I personally find her a little bit boring, but admittedly, she's way more fun than she used to be because now I think she may have the best exalted weapon in the game, or at least top 3. Shattered Lash is bonkers currently. The only issue I have with putting her so high on the list is that out of all the pseudo-exalteds, comparing this to Korra's Whip or Atlas's Landslide, it feels the least like a melee weapon, even though it still counts. It has its own melee combo count, works with Raffle Advance. You just swipe a room and everything's gone. It one-shots at such high levels now. She also has large amounts of damage reduction. She can also grant that to her teammates and objectives. She can debuff enemies with it. She can also spread that debuff really efficiently with her augments as well. The scary thing about Gara is how efficient she is currently. I find it kind of difficult making a little bit of an argument between who you would pick between her and Korra. They're essentially achieving the same thing. It's just that Gara seems like a more go-to option for more missions for me lately. She may not be the best caster for something like shield gating, but Shattered Lash is so good with any sort of helmet. Even without a helmet, just get yourself to a 12x combo multiplier and everything dies within the click of a button. I don't know what to say other than you need to try her for yourself in order to understand just how strong she is right now. Okay, I feel like we might be getting a little bit controversial with our number 2 spot. And that's because people were up in arms with the recent rework, and we're talking about Valkyrie, of course. Valkyrie got a rework. A bunch of her mains were understandably up in arms about the changes to her invulnerability, but I really like the Valkyrie changes. I can't speak for everyone, but if you want any proof as to just how strong she currently is, as long as you're an active player and aren't playing too lazy with your playstyle, look no further than this video right here where we took her on a level cap solo survival. I seriously miss being able to do this for these videos without my PC crashing, but Valkyrie is offering so many things right now for the melee playstyle. She has grouping and mobility with her rip line. You can pull enemies in as well as get yourself from point A to point B and close gaps faster. You can boost your armor and attack speed for you and your allies with Warcry, effectively turning any melee weapon into a blender. She can debuff enemies for more melee damage, and has an augment that turns it into a grouping tool as well with paralysis. Her Force skill is an incredibly strong exalted weapon. Crazy slide attacks and slash damage, works really well with a bunch of helmets, and also gives you even more armor from your Warcry. So she already has the brawler playstyle down, but then her passive also allows you to basically be functionally immortal if you're using the correct amount of range on your melee weapons. If you charge up the meter, you get an invulnerability window. So if you die, you'll become invulnerable, and then a few seconds later, you'll become vulnerable again. But if you build up that meter in the meantime, you can basically recast this invulnerability and infinitely loop it. You can efficiently do this with your Valkyrie Talons, because her slide attacks will get you incredibly far across the ground, closing the distance quickly, or you could just group enemies with your 1, a few hits into a horde, and boom, you've got that meter back up, meaning you're invulnerable again. Or you can use any melee weapon you want and throw a bunch of range on it, making it way more efficient for you to just swing the weapon around. If you use that life and you become invulnerable, a few swings of your Orthos Prime with Prime Reach on it, 10 enemies within 10 meters just get swiped by your Orthos, and boom, you've got your passive recharged and you're ready to die again. And you can do this without any sort of overly necessary shield gate or shield regen builds. So you can build her for a health tank armor based brawler playstyle, and still scale to level cap as long as you have the correct melee build, activity with your talons and range, and your passive is going to keep you alive. I think she's one of the most versatile melee frames in the game. I still do love using her talons the most, even though technically I guess it's not the best option specifically for the passive, but in terms of damage, definitely one of the best in the game. Also incredibly strong without a helmet as well. And for the number 1 spot, I'm curious to see how many of you guys are in agreement, but I think Kullervo is the no-brainer for this category. You have combo efficiency with him, meaning that you can spam heavy attacks without Tennokai and not lose out on too much damage. Raffle Advance allows you to close distance with enemies as well as grant yourself a huge crit chance buff to your melee weapons. I know that other frames can equip this via the helmet, but what makes Kullervo the best with Raffle Advance is that not only does he have that really important passive, but a great second skill with overguard survivability and an augment that makes it loop infinitely. But his third skill, Collective Curse, is the big kicker here. Collective Curse allows you to spread the damage you do to the target you've casted it on to the remaining hordes in the area. It's a large percentage as well, so the idea is you cast Collective Curse, then you Raffle Advance to one of the enemies in that group, and everyone else dies. The best way I can describe Kullervo is though you're adding melee influence on top of an already existing melee influence. All you really need to do is just build him for range. He has a 4th ability as well, which isn't really melee related, but it is very good as well. Some may say that he's not the best melee in the game just because Raffle Advance is a subsume, but I think Collective Curse is the reason why he's so good. Even without the augment for his 2, his survivability is solid, and I like the fact that I don't have to run Tennokai on him. This makes him particularly synergistic with something like the Tonkat, where you want to deplete your melee meter to make use of its passive, so you don't have to run Tennokai on it, and you're not going to completely deplete that meter. Huge crit chance buff, widespread damage, insanely efficient overguard gain. I think Kullervo has it all for this class, and that's why he's ranked number 1 for me within the best melee frames in the game. So those are my top 10 melee Warframes. Let me know which ones you agree and disagree with. Do you think I got the order right, or is my list complete garbage and some of the honorable mentions should have been in the actual list itself? If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to like and sub. You can also check out 2 of the previous videos in which I did in-depth guides on both Atlas and Ash. If you're looking for interesting and unique builds on this channel, that is where I recommend going to those guides, because it will cover stuff other than just the standard Raffle and Nourish that you saw here. And if you're looking for more content that is not Warframe related, I have a 3rd channel, and on this channel we do a bunch of high quality video game essays. Any support over there is greatly appreciated. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.